I accidentally found out that my wife was seeing someone else. At first, there was rage, then, the perfect revenge plan. I invited her to one last dinner, pretended I knew nothing, and handed her an envelope. Divorce? No. It was photos of her lover with another woman. Her world shattered in a second. What would you do in my place? What are you doing, Chuck? Stop. It's me. This is a joke, right? Her voice cracked. Her eyes widened in horror. She stood in our bedroom, clenching her fists as if she could somehow stop what I was about to do. I looked at her in silence. Too late, Ariadne. She thought I would never find out. She thought her little secret would remain hidden. But I already knew everything. A few months ago, I would have never imagined we'd end up here. We had a good marriage. Not perfect, but stable. I worked as a freelancer, mostly from home, so I had more free time than most men. Ariadne worked at an advertising agency. She was always busy, constantly on the move, calls, meetings, deadlines. I was used to her schedule, used to falling asleep without her when she stayed late, used to hearing her soft "love you" before she rushed out of the apartment in the morning. But about 6 months ago, things started to change. At first, it was almost unnoticeable. She began coming home later and later. At first, it was just occasional days. We're reworking a project. My boss asked me to stay. Then it became 2 or 3 times a week. And then, almost every day. I didn't think much of it at first. Ariadne loved her job, and I wasn't going to be the kind of husband who controlled her every move. But little things kept bothering me. One morning, as she was getting ready for work, I noticed her pulling on lace stockings. I leaned against the doorway and smiled. Who's all this beauty for? Ariadne flinched as if I had startled her. What? Well, you only used to wear those for special nights. She quickly turned to the mirror, adjusting her hair. I just felt like it. She just felt like it. And that wasn't the only time. She started paying more attention to her appearance. She spent hours on makeup, chose dresses she never wore for me. And then came the phone. It was always in her hand. If it rang or vibrated, she'd grab it instantly, even if we were just sitting together on the couch. I jokingly said once, "Oh, is your phone your new best friend now?" She let out a nervous laugh. Just a lot of work. Yeah, a lot of work. But I wasn't stupid. I felt something was off. I saw it in the way she stopped looking me in the eye, in how she avoided casual touches, in how she sometimes stepped onto the balcony to take calls, closing the door behind her. I told myself I was overthinking it, that it was just a coincidence. But the suspicion had already taken root in me, growing stronger every day. The final straw came one evening when I decided to surprise her. It was a Friday, and she told me she'd be working late at the office. I thought it would be a nice idea to pick her up and take her out to dinner. I bought her favorite chocolate croissants, grabbed some takeout coffee, and drove to her office. It was 9 p.m. I parked and called her. "Hey, love, are you still at the office?" "Yeah," she answered quickly. "So much work." I looked at the building. It was almost empty. Only one window was lit on the 3rd floor. "Okay, I don't want to distract you. I just wanted to say that I bought you coffee and croissants." "Oh, thank you. But you probably won't be able to come up. The front door is already locked." I frowned. "Seriously?" "Yeah, the whole place is alarmed." I glanced up at the 3rd floor window. A silhouette appeared, and it wasn't Ariadne's. I didn't know what was happening yet, but something inside me had already broken. The next day, I started looking for answers. I wasn't a professional detective, but, if someone is trying to hide something from you, they will definitely make a mistake somewhere. Ariadne slipped up in the details. I found a receipt from a restaurant we had never been to together. I saw her search history, a hotel downtown, booked for one day. I started asking questions. "How's work?" "Oh, terrible. My boss won't let me breathe." "And how was the office party?" "Party? What party?" Aha. She didn't know that I had already found out. She didn't know that on the very night she was working late on a project, I had gone to a bar on the other side of the city and saw her. Not alone. With him. I didn't make a scene. I didn't start a fight. I just stood there and watched as she laughed, touched his hand, leaned in closer. And when they went into the restroom together, I understood everything. I walked up to the door. The dishes in the bar were expensive, but the sounds coming from behind that door cost me nothing. I stood there, clenching my fists, listening to her moans. She had no idea I was there. She didn't know her world had just started crumbling, and I was going to make sure it collapsed completely. I walked out of the bar, inhaling the cold air. My head was buzzing, my insides twisting with rage, but I didn't let myself scream or punch a wall. Instead, I went home, sat on the couch, and replayed what I had seen over and over again. She hadn't even bothered to hide. It was as if she was sure I wouldn't suspect a thing, as if I was just part of the background for her, like the furniture in our apartment. I picked up my phone, scrolled through our last messages. I love you, darling. I miss you. Lies. Everything was a lie. The next day, I acted like nothing had happened. Ariadne came home after work, kissed me on the cheek, quickly changed, and went to take a shower. I sat in the kitchen, staring at her phone lying on the table. It was locked, but the screen suddenly lit up. A message from Leo. You were amazing. I didn't know any Leo. I didn't even touch her phone. I just watched the screen until it went dark again. A plan was already forming in my head. I wasn't going to throw a cheap drama, scream, or smash dishes. She wanted to play these games? Fine. But now, I would set the rules. I started acting carefully. I installed a hidden tracker on her phone. Nothing special, just an app that gave me access to her location. She didn't even notice when I set it up while she was in the shower. Then, I waited. For a week, I closely monitored her routes. Work, home, and then, a new location. A hotel downtown. Every time she was working late, she was actually there. One evening, I drove there when her phone showed she was inside. I sat in my car, watching the entrance. 40 minutes later, Ariadne walked out. She wasn't alone. He walked beside her. Tall, wearing an expensive suit, with that same smug smile I had grown to hate. They stood by the entrance, talking about something, and then he pulled her close and kissed her. She didn't even push him away. No, she kissed him back, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my fingers turned white. Rage boiled inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I already knew what I was going to do. For the next few days, I prepared. I installed cameras in the apartment. One in the bedroom, another in the living room. Small, hidden, but good enough to capture everything I needed. I started talking to her more about her work, asking details, making her slip up. And she did. Oh, we were working on a new project for a cosmetics brand. The next day, no, it was a client from the automotive industry. A day later, nothing special, just paperwork. She wasn't even trying to keep track of her own lies. And then, finally, the moment came. Ariadne was getting ready for work again. I nodded, smiled as usual. But as soon as the door closed behind her, I pulled out my phone and turned on the cameras. An hour later, she returned. I was sitting in the living room, calm, holding the TV remote in my hands. She walked in, smiling. Hi, honey. I nodded in response, pressed a button, and the video started playing on the big TV screen. Footage from the bedroom camera. Ariadne entering with the same man. Her laughter. He pulls her toward the bed. I didn't look at the screen. I looked at her. Her face paled. Her eyes widened. Chuck, what is this? I didn't answer. I just watched. On the video, she was kissing him. Her hands around his neck, his hands on her body. She stepped back, covering her mouth with her hand. This isn't what you think. I finally looked at the screen. You know, Ariadne, when I was standing by the bathroom door in that bar, listening to you moan for him, I thought nothing could be worse. But now, seeing you bring him into our home, into our bed, you've outdone yourself. She was trembling. Please, it was a mistake. I laughed. A mistake? You had sex in our bedroom. That was a long series of mistakes, Ariadne. She rushed toward me, grabbing my hands. I never meant to hurt you. It meant nothing. I pulled my hands away from her grip. Oh, it meant a lot to me. I picked up my phone and pressed a button. What are you doing? Her voice shook. Sending this to your boss. She froze. No. And to your parents. Your friends. Do you want everyone to see who you really are? She collapsed to her knees, clutching my legs. Chuck, please don't. I leaned down and whispered in her ear. You betrayed me. Now it's your turn to feel what it's like to lose everything. I walked out of the apartment, leaving her there on the floor, broken and humiliated. And most importantly, finally alone. I got into my car but didn't start it. I just sat there, listening. Through the open window, I could hear Ariadne sobbing inside the apartment. She wiped her tears, begged, but I felt no pity. I had waited for this moment, waited for her to realize she had lost everything. She thought she was in control, that her lies would remain a secret. But now, the truth was crushing her like a concrete slab. And this was just the beginning. I turned on my phone. The video she had just seen on the screen was already uploaded to the cloud. I had copies. She could cry, beg for forgiveness, make excuses, but I had the evidence that spoke for itself. Suddenly, a message popped up on my phone. Unknown number. We need to talk. This is about Ariadne. I froze. Who was this? I didn't reply immediately. I waited a few minutes, staring at the message, until the screen lit up again. You need to know the truth. Tomorrow at 8 p.m., Cafe Horizon, downtown. Come alone. I reread the text. Questions swirled in my head. Was this a joke? Was one of her friends trying to talk to me? Or maybe it was that bastard Leo. After all, what did I have to lose? I pressed OK and set the phone aside. The next evening, I arrived at the cafe exactly at 8 p.m. It was a small place on the corner of the street, with dim lighting and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. I stepped inside, looking around. There weren't many people. Someone was sitting with a laptop. A couple of young guys were joking at the bar, but I saw no one suspicious. I was starting to think this was some stupid prank when I saw her. A woman at one of the tables. Blonde, brown eyes, wearing a business suit. She met my gaze and smiled slightly, as if she had been expecting me. I walked closer. You sent me the message? She nodded, gesturing toward the chair across from her. Sit down, Chuck. I sat slowly, still on guard. Who are you? She took a sip of coffee and set the cup down. My name is Grace, and it's no coincidence that I know your name. I tensed. You're a friend of Ariadne's? She smiled again, but this time there was something sharp in that smile. Not exactly. I'm her colleague, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that I know she didn't just lie to you about Leo. I frowned. What do you mean? Grace slowly leaned in closer. You think Leo was the only one? I froze. A sinking feeling crept into my chest. This conversation was only just beginning. Talk. Leo isn't her first and certainly not her only lover. She's been seeing other men for over a year now. I felt a lump forming in my throat. Are you serious? Grace nodded. I work with her, and I know more than she thinks. She's good at playing the perfect wife, but in reality, she's always had backup options. Leo is just the latest on the list. I tried to stay calm, but my fists clenched on their own. Why are you telling me this? Grace leaned in closer. Because I know you want revenge. And because she screwed me over too. I looked at her, processing her words. What do you mean? She used me to cover her tracks. Once, I told her I was going on vacation, and she told everyone we were on a business trip together. I didn't even know until I overheard our boss praising her. I slowly absorbed the information. So, you want to destroy her too? Grace smiled, and it wasn't just cold. It was dangerous. Yes. And what do you suggest? She leaned in even closer, her voice lowering. I have access to her work files. I know she's been forging documents to get bonuses, and if that gets out, she'll be fired. But that's not enough, is it? I nodded. It's not. Then listen carefully. Grace started talking, and with every word, I realized this wasn't just going to be revenge. This was going to be her downfall. I listened to Grace, absorbing every detail. She spoke fast, confidently, like she had already planned this for a long time. She has another man. Grace paused, letting me process the information. And you know him. I gritted my teeth, trying not to show any reaction. Who is it? Grace pulled out her phone, quickly opened something, and placed it on the table in front of me. I looked down. On the screen was a photo. Ariadne, her hands on some man's shoulders, their faces too close. Blood pounded in my ears as I recognized him. Miles. My friend. My friend, whom I trusted. This was taken a few weeks ago. She told you she was working late? See where she really was. I stared at the photo, something inside me tearing apart. Leo was just a worthless piece of trash, a random character in her double life. But Miles? I had known him for years. We went to bars together, celebrated holidays together. I thought I could trust him. I see you need a little more time to process this. Grace leaned back in her chair and took a sip of coffee. I slowly ran a hand over my face. How did you find out about this? I have my sources. She smiled, but there was no warmth in her eyes. And trust me, this isn't all. I looked up. What do you mean? Grace pulled up another photo. This time, it was a screenshot of a message. Baby, Chuck suspects nothing. We can see each other as much as we want. Sender. Ariadne. Recipient. Miles. Rage consumed me so violently that I barely stopped myself from breaking something right there in the cafe. She hadn't just cheated on me. She had done it with someone I considered a friend. Grace watched me, calm, unwavering. Do you want revenge? I lifted my eyes to hers. Yes. She nodded, as if that was exactly what she had expected. Then here's what we're going to do. The next day, I met up with Miles. He suspected nothing, smiling as usual and rambling about something unimportant while we sat at the bar. I could barely stand looking at him. His voice disgusted me. Every gesture felt fake. Dude, why do you look so tense? I smiled. Just a lot on my mind. Has Ariadne reached out to you yet? I narrowed my eyes. About what? He hesitated. Never mind. Liar. I saw it in the way he avoided my gaze. No, tell me. Was she supposed to say something to me? Miles hesitated for a second, then shrugged. I just thought she might have texted you. Why? I don't know. I smiled, but inside, rage was boiling. It's all good, buddy. Ariadne and I are no longer together. His eyes quickly scanned my face. What? Seriously? Yeah. Damn, man. I'm sorry. Liar. Nah, it's fine. In fact, I'd say I'm free now. I can focus on my own life. I paused and added, and you know, you won't believe it, but I've met someone too. Miles looked at me intently. Yeah? Who is she? I smiled. Grace. A moment of silence. His eyes narrowed slightly. Grace? Yeah. She works with Ariadne. I noticed his hand tighten around his glass. Cool. Yeah. You have no idea how much she's told me. Miles froze. About what? Oh, nothing special. Just some interesting things about Ariadne. I saw a bead of sweat roll down his forehead. Like what? I finished my drink and set the glass on the table. Like the fact that she wasn't only cheating on me with Leo. Miles tensed slightly. Dude, What? He pressed his lips together, then relaxed them again. Nothing. Just sucks that it happened. I nodded. Yeah, it sucks. But you know what? He looked up at me. Now she's going to get what she deserves. I pulled out my phone, found Grace's number, and dialed it. Hey, baby, I said loudly, knowing Miles could hear. Yeah, he's here. I did everything just like you said. I think we can move on to part 2 now. Miles didn't move, but I could see his heart pounding in his throat. I smiled. The game was just beginning. I saw Miles trying to stay calm, but a flicker of fear flashed in his eyes. He swallowed hard, looked down, then back at me, trying to figure out what I knew. I held the phone to my ear for a few more seconds, pretending to have a conversation with Grace, then smiled and placed it on the table. You do realize I know everything, right? Miles flinched but kept playing his role. I don't know what you're talking about. I leaned in closer, holding my glass, slowly rotating it in my hands. About Ariadne. About you two sneaking around behind my back. About the hotel. About her lies. He jerked back, letting out a nervous laugh. Man, there must be some mistake. Really? I raised an eyebrow. Then let me just show you the pictures. I took out my phone, opened the images Grace had sent me, and placed them in front of him. He froze. The photo showed Ariadne sitting on his lap, her hands around his neck, their lips almost touching. Miles went pale, then tried to say something, but I cut him off. She lied to you just like she lied to me. You think you were the only one? His fists clenched. What do you mean? I glanced at my phone again, found another photo, and placed it in front of him. This. He looked down and went still. This time, the photo was taken in my apartment. In our bedroom. Ariadne wasn't alone. I took that picture the night I first realized she had changed. I woke up in the middle of the night to a sound. It was dark, only moonlight slipping through the curtains. I reached for Ariadne, but she wasn't there. Then I heard hushed voices from the next room. My heart pounded. I got up, quietly following the sound. The door to the living room was slightly ajar. And that's when I saw her. She stood by the couch, half-dressed, her hands resting on another man's shoulders. He sat there, holding her waist, looking at her with the same smile I once saw in my own reflection. They didn't notice me. I took a step back, grabbed my phone, and snapped a picture. Then I went back to bed, pretending to be asleep. She returned half an hour later, lay down next to me, and barely brushed my shoulder. I didn't move. That's when I knew. She hadn't just cheated on me. She did it here, in our home, right next to me, while I slept. And now, sitting in the bar, I watched as Miles slowly realized the truth. She wasn't only seeing you, Miles. His jaw tensed. It's true. And I'm sure you already understand everything. He let out a heavy sigh, covering his face with his hands. Why are you telling me this? I smiled. Because I'm curious about what you'll do next. Miles lifted his eyes to me. She lied to me. She lied to both of us. He sat in silence for a moment, then nodded. I'll help you. I extended my hand to him. Then let's make sure she understands what happens when you lie to the wrong people. The next morning, I woke up early, silently watching Ariadne as she slept peacefully beside me. That feeling, when nothing was left of the emotions I once had for her. That love, that admiration. All these years, we seemed like the perfect couple, but in the hardest moment, I realized she had long stopped being the person I thought she was. I could no longer look at her the same way. She wasn't my wife anymore. She was someone who had betrayed my trust, and that tormented me. Ariadne stirred and turned toward me, her face looking so serene, as if nothing had happened. I turned away and got out of bed. I needed more time to process everything, to make a decision. I stood by the window, staring at the street, but my thoughts kept circling back to her. How could she do this? How could she betray me so easily? I had always tried to be a good husband, supporting her ambitions, helping her, yet she had shattered everything we built together just like that. I wasn't ready to just walk away. It wasn't that simple. I had imagined many times what it would be like, to say goodbye to all our shared memories, to all those moments we had lived together. We had our special traditions, our plans for the future. But now, I realized none of it mattered anymore. She chose Miles. She chose him over me. I tried to picture her face when she would realize that I knew the truth. How would she react? Would she try to explain? Feel guilty? Or just come up with new lies to manipulate me further? I wasn't ready to simply accept it because my heart was broken. And what I still felt for her wasn't love anymore. It was just pain and betrayal. Pain that wouldn't let me go. When I returned to the bedroom, Ariadne was already sitting at the edge of the bed, looking at me. She smiled, and in her eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Ease, as if nothing had happened, as if she was just living her life. She didn't know that I knew. She didn't know that the false peace she surrounded herself with had already been shattered. Her manipulations had no power over what I felt. You didn't sleep? She asked, turning to me. I paused for a few seconds, gathering my thoughts. No, I just went to bed late. She nodded, as if nothing was wrong, and got up to make breakfast. I've put together some ideas for our next project, she said, smiling. I think this will be exactly what we need to finally break through. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't just listen to her continue lying and manipulating. To watch her live in her little bubble, ignoring what I was feeling, what I was going through. I realized I couldn't follow her rhythm anymore, couldn't pretend that everything was fine. I didn't want to be with her anymore, but I didn't know how to say it. I don't want this anymore, I said quietly but firmly. We can't go on. You betrayed me, Ariadne, and I can't be with you anymore. She fell silent. Her smile slowly faded, and I saw her eyes widen in surprise before she tried to collect herself. "What are you trying to say?" she asked, her voice softer, trying to mask the panic. "I can't be with a woman who lied to my face, who betrayed me," I replied. "You did everything to make sure I could never trust you again. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed our family, our plans." She lifted her head, trying to hold back tears. I saw it, but I felt no sympathy. I realized it no longer mattered. Those tears were just another part of her manipulation, another attempt to keep me under her control. "I love you," she said in a trembling voice. "I made a mistake. I'm sorry. You're everything I want." Her words didn't touch me. I couldn't believe her. How could I trust someone who so easily changed her feelings for another man? "This changes nothing," I said, stepping away from her. "You betrayed me, and I can't undo that. There's nothing left between us." She stood in silence, looking at me with a mix of disappointment and fear. I could see how hard it was for her to realize that she no longer had the control she once did. But I could no longer let her manipulate me, even if I still felt something for her. I slowly gathered my things and walked out of the house. She remained standing in the empty room, and I knew this time it was truly over. This wasn't just a decision. It was a necessity for me. I could no longer stay with her, and though it was painful, I knew the right thing to do was to let her go. I couldn't just walk out of that house and forget everything we had. No matter how much it hurt, the realization that Ariadne had betrayed me was worse than any loss. My heart was pounding wildly, but I tried to keep my emotions in check. If I didn't leave now, I might never be able to escape this trap. As I walked out, I heard her whisper, "Where are you going?" I paused for a moment but didn't turn around. "I don't know. But that's no longer your concern," I said calmly, trying to suppress everything raging inside me. I heard her footsteps behind me, a shadow trailing after me. If I turned around, I would see her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't. This was my line, my last drop of patience. I could no longer be her protector, her hope. I had to walk away, even if my heart was pulling me back. At the door, she stopped, her hands pressing against the frame, her eyes glowing with that same sad look I had seen 100 times when she wanted something she couldn't have. "Please, don't go," she whispered, her voice softer than ever. "We can fix this. We can be what we used to be." I stood still, refusing to look at her. All those words, they were nothing more than empty promises. They had no power anymore because she had shattered my trust. I couldn't turn back. I just couldn't. "I don't want to be your past," I replied, my voice colder than I had ever noticed before. "You lost me." I took a step forward, leaving her behind. With each step, I felt myself moving further away from the place where we once dreamed of happiness, but where now only emptiness remained. The street was quiet. I walked, listening to the silence that enveloped everything. I knew I was probably leaving behind everything I had, yet at the same time, I felt the heavy weight lifting from my shoulders. Hours later, I found myself on the old bridge where Ariadne and I once walked hand in hand, laughing, planning our future. Now, this place felt foreign. I didn't know why I had come here. Maybe I needed to remind myself of what I was leaving behind. I couldn't decide if I felt relief or just more pain. From behind, I heard a voice. "You shouldn't have left." I turned around. It wasn't Ariadne, it was Sarah. She stood there, the one who had always been my friend, but nothing more. I hadn't expected to see her here. She was beautiful, her eyes piercing, though not as much as Ariadne's. She didn't stir the same storm of emotions in me, yet something in her gaze made me pause. "Sarah?" I said, looking at her. "How did you find me here?" "I knew you'd come," she said, her voice quiet but certain. "You always come here when things get hard." She stepped closer, and I felt her presence shift the atmosphere. She didn't try to stand between me and my pain. She was on a different level. There was no comfort or judgment in her eyes. She was simply there, watching me in silence. "Are you okay?" she asked, not forcing her support on me, just being there. I didn't answer right away. My emotions were like torn fragments, my soul in turmoil, and I had no idea what to do next. How had I ended up at this crossroads, where the past had no power anymore and the future seemed completely unclear. How can you just watch this? I muttered, my voice unsteady. How can you not help me decide what to do next? Sarah didn't look away. She remained there, beside me. Her presence was my last safe harbor. She stepped closer, gently touching my shoulder. Because I can't decide for you, she said softly, but I'm here, and I'll always be here if you need to talk. I felt my mind waver at her words. It was hard to accept that Sarah wasn't trying to change the situation, but maybe that was the right approach. She wasn't forcing me to make a choice. She was simply there, and that was enough. I don't know what to do with all of this, I said quietly. She betrayed me, and I can't forgive her. Sarah sighed, her face showing understanding. Maybe you don't have to forgive her, she replied, her words like a gentle breeze calming a storm. But you have the right to choose what happens next. It was hard for me to understand why now. Why Sarah? But I could feel her support giving me strength. She wasn't offering easy solutions. She was simply helping me see that I wasn't alone in this struggle. We sat on the bridge in silence, staring at the water. And in that moment, I realized, what happens next doesn't matter as much as understanding who I am and what I want from this world. What would you do if you were in his place, discovering betrayal right before leaving your wife?